So picture this. You're at your desk, you're feeling off. Maybe it's a headache that just won't quit, or you're just tired all the time. And the thought pops into your head, hey, maybe I should just drop by and see the company doctor. I mean, it's easy, it's right there. But what if that super convenient choice is actually a way bigger risk than you think?
Okay, let's just cut to the chase with a really important question. Is that occupational physician your company provides, are they truly a safe person to see about your health concerns? Well, the answer you might be surprised to hear could very well be no. And today we're going to unpack exactly why that is.
All right, so here's where it gets tricky. You've got this fundamental conflict, right? On one hand, your company doctor is, legally speaking, a physician. They've got the medical license, which means they are 100% allowed to give you a diagnosis. But on the other hand, that piece of paper says absolutely nothing about their current, practical ability to get that diagnosis right. And that gap, that's what we're diving into.
And that brings us right to our first big idea, the massive difference between just having a license and actually possessing sharp, practical skills. You know, it's a distinction that can have some pretty serious consequences for your health.
Here's a super simple way to think about it. A medical license? It's basically a driver's license. It just proves you passed a test at some point. But we all know that one person, right? They have a license, but you would never, ever get in a car with them. Well, the exact same principle applies here.
So what's the skill that just fades without daily reps? It's this thing called clinical intuition. Some people call it the art of sensation. This isn't just about reading a chart or looking at lab results. It's that gut feeling an experienced doctor gets from noticing 1,000 tiny, almost invisible clues that tell them, something's not right here.
And these clues can be incredibly subtle. We're talking about the slightest change in a patient's facial expression, a little waver in their voice, even a faint body odor. These are all data points that a doctor in a busy clinic or a hospital is processing almost subconsciously all day, every day. That constant fire hose of information is what keeps their diagnostic instincts razor sharp.
And look, the stakes here are incredibly high. Without that finely tuned clinical intuition, a physician might easily miss the early signs of some very real and very treatable conditions. Things like thyroid problems, anemia, or the first stages of depression can get brushed off as just stress or burnout, and that allows them to get much, much worse.
Now let's move on, because this isn't just about a lack of good information. It can actually become something way more dangerous. We're talking about getting actively bad information from a source you are literally programmed to trust.
You know, we're all told, be skeptical of what you read online. Don't diagnose yourself with a quick search. But here's the thing. The most dangerous piece of medical advice you could ever get, it doesn't come from a search engine.
Nope. It comes from what's called authoritative misinformation. This is when you get a wrong diagnosis or just plain bad advice delivered by someone with a medical license. A vague, oh, you're fine, just get some rest, from a doctor carries so much more weight than a random web page, even if the doctor is totally wrong.
And that's the real heart of the danger. The white coat, the doctor before their name, it all screams authority, right? We're just socially and psychologically conditioned to hear a doctor's opinion as fact, as the final word. And when that happens, we stop questioning. And maybe even worse, we stop advocating for ourselves.
The fallout from this can be really serious. It gives you this false sense of security, so you put off seeing a specialist who could have actually helped. A condition that was treatable gets worse. And maybe the most insidious part? You start to doubt your own body. You dismiss real symptoms as being all in your head.
Okay, so the problem is pretty clear, but how do you actually spot the risk? Let's get practical and break down the specific profiles of company doctors that are most likely to have this gap between their license and their actual clinical skill.
So here are 3 big red flags to look out for. First up, the full-timer. This is the doc who only works as a company physician, maybe hopping between different offices, but with no regular clinical practice. Second, the non-patient-facing specialist. Think radiologists or pathologists. They're brilliant experts at looking at scans and slides, but maybe not so much at diagnosing a living, breathing person sitting in front of them. And third, the routine task doctor. This is someone from a super repetitive field where they see the same narrow problems all day, which can dull their ability to spot something out of the ordinary.
And hey, to put it in today's terms, a doctor whose skills have gone stale can sometimes be less helpful than a basic AI. Seriously. An algorithm can at least flag when your symptoms fall outside the statistical norm. But a doctor relying on outdated knowledge might miss that same flag and then convince both you and themselves that everything is totally fine. Okay, I know this all sounds pretty scary, but here is the good news. You are not powerless here. Not at all. Let's get to the most important part of this whole thing, what you can actually do to protect yourself.
You do not have to be a medical expert to gauge the situation. All you need is a really simple 2-point safety check. Think of it as your personal pre-flight checklist before you decide how much you should really trust the advice you're about to get.
All right, here it is. 2 super simple questions you can usually answer with a quick online search. First, are they currently seeing patients in a hospital or their own clinic? This tells you if their skills are fresh. And second, do they have a background in general practice? Are they a GP? A GP is trained to look at the whole person, not just one little piece, which is exactly what you want for a first opinion.
So, to put it all together, your ideal setup is a practicing GP who also does the company doctor thing on the side. They bring that real-world, up-to-the-minute experience with them. The riskiest scenario, that's the physician who's left the clinic behind completely. Their advice is much more likely to be generic and miss those crucial details.
All right, finally, let's just zoom out for a second. Because honestly, this isn't really about a few bad doctors. It's about a whole system that's got some serious flaws baked right into it.
You've got 3 big pressures working against good care here. First, who pays the doctor? Your company does, not you. That right there is a potential conflict of interest. Second, the pay for these roles is often pretty low, which forces doctors to take on a ton of different companies just to make a living. And that leads to the third point. They have very limited time for you. Your consultation might be just a few minutes long, which is almost never enough time for a proper evaluation.
So the big takeaway here is that the problem isn't necessarily bad people. It's a broken system. It's a system that lets a doctor's most important tool, their actual clinical skill, get rusty, while their authority stays perfectly polished.
And that leaves us with this final, really important thought. At the end of the day, you are the CEO of your own health. So the next time you think about seeing the company doctor, just ask yourself this one question. Is the system my company set up really there to protect my health, or is it just there to check a box? The answer to that, well, it could change everything.